Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever in the world you are. Tonight, I'd like to start this program with revisiting an interview that Mai Mujuru gave to Al Jazeera some time ago, and then comment on it. So let's just start by listening to this one.
Rahundi 5th Brigade was. It
Yes.
wasn't in the main, army of Zimbabwe. It was a private army, and which reported directly to Mugabe.
Fair enough. It reported directly to Mugabe, but you and your husband directly reported to Mugabe. Neither of you spoke out against those killings. I don't know if you did it in private. You certainly didn't do it in public. Neither of you quit your jobs in disgust at the murder of 20,000 of your fellow citizens. Did you?
He categorically refused that such things were happening in Matabeleland. Of course, that's what he said. And what else can you say? When somebody who is responsible has answered with a straight face that with whatever you're thinking is happening, nothing of that sort. I, as the head of state, I'm just trying to sort out things that are not going on well. Of course, you have to believe him.
But your husband, Solomon, died in a fire in 2011. Many people claim he was murdered. You believe he was killed by the Mugabe government. Is that right? You think he might have done it?
Of course, how can I clear people in government when I know that what we had requested as a family was not accepted by that government?
Did you really shoot down a helicopter with a machine gun when you were 18 years old? Did it happen or not?
It did happen.
Well. Good evening to you, Benjamin. What's your reaction to this one?
Good evening to you too, and good evening to our viewers. Well, interesting and I must say very good questions, and of which I think personally she failed to answer even one convincingly. First of all, you are part of a system, that is killing people, right? You may not be killing them directly, like physically holding the gun, but you're being told, right, that the killings are happening and the order is coming from your top, from your boss. Now it is up to you. Integrity. This is where integrity comes into play, right? What do you stand for, right? You cannot just ignore just because he says he's not aware of it, but you are aware of it, right? So for me, I think she doesn't have an excuse. It's just trying to justify, to wash her hands off the killings, but she was part of the system that was going around killing people, and she is responsible for the atrocities that happened in Matabeleland. And I don't think she can justify and wash her hands clean of this. And when it comes to her husband, I mean, I think that is pretty obvious. She knew, but what did she do about it again? So it all comes down to integrity. What do you stand for at the end of the day?
Well, in this particular case, if it was a few people being killed, one could say, okay, maybe she didn't understand what's going on. When you're talking over 20,000 people, of course she knew. Of course she knew. But I think the interview actually pointed out the fundamental weakness with our political system. She and her fellow Zanu PF members, as far as I know, none of them resigned in protest at what was happening with Kukurawundi. None of them have ever resigned over a lot of other things that have followed in Zimbabwe. None. Why is that so? That is where the biggest problem with our culture, with our political system is. And I think the root cause of it is, of course, that Mugabe, soon after independence, established his patronage system in which he bribed those around him with the trappings of high office. And in response, they were blindly loyal to him. And therefore, then the issue of values and standing up for what is right fell up by the wayside. They wanted to be on the gravy train. They could not risk challenging Mugabe on even in a big issue like the Matabeleland killings, what followed afterwards, things like Operation Murambasvina, the 2008 wanton violence to rig the elections and reinstate Zanu PF back in power. All those things, they ignored them out of greed. That is the tragedy with Zimbabwe.
Yes, I agree with you. You know, I think what lacked is, like I said, is integrity. And because the fact that, once you have been bribed, you have just, sold out that right to speak up, right? So they just had to go with the flow. And now that Mugabe is not there, it's to defend himself that, we together when we made these decisions. Now they're blaming or pushing the blame onto him. But I mean, if you're part of a system that is oppressive, you cannot then just wash your hands to say it was the leader that was oppressive. I'm sure there were instructions that they followed, that were given by such a person. So that just alone would mean that they were part of it. So it's impossible for them to now wash their hands of the killings, like you said, other atrocities that happened in Zimbabwe. It's impossible, and it's very unfortunate. None of them have been held accountable up to today. It's very, very unfortunate.
Yeah, I think the other point I would like to emphasize here is how Mugabe has used the same system to bribe the opposition. The silence of Mujuru and their fellow Zanu PF leaders, because they had been bribed by Mugabe, is the same as what happened during the GNU. The opposition were elected to bring about democratic change, as the party name implies, the Movement for Democratic Change. But the minute they got into power and they were given the ministerial limousines, the generous packs, for Morgan Tsvangirai, the US $4 million house, and so forth, they forgot about reforms. This weakness is not only there in Zanu PF, it was also there. And it is still there in the opposition. The minute they get into power, they forget all about the promises that they made to the ordinary people. Our African politics have become, you hold public office as an opportunity to amass wealth for yourself. And all promises of serving the people are all forgotten in that rush moment of amassing wealth for yourself. I'd like just to play this short video. I will not play, sorry, I will not play all of it, but part of it. When Professor Lumumba, he has become one of the few African intellectuals who really have addressed this problem of bad governance in Africa. And I think it will benefit this discussion to just listen to him.
You know, sometimes, and many are those times, when I read the story in the Bible and I read about Jesus of Nazareth, and I wrap my mind about his humility, and I hear him many times saying that he did not come to be served, but he came to serve. Then I look at our leaders who, when they are seeking to serve us, when they are seeking our support, they are humility personified. They kiss babies. They go to the shibin. They drink from dirty cups. They walk on foot. They smile with us. They take photos with everybody. They discard their security. They are humility personified. They speak the language that we want to hear. They do the things that they think we want to see them do. They delude us. They cheat us. And somehow we accept that they are leaders. But immediately they get what they want, or they have a reverse Pauline conversion. If they were Paul, they go back to being Sauls, and we can no longer recognize them. When you ring them, their phones are picked by somebody called a PA, whose only claim to fame that he is rude beyond measure. When you go to the offices, they no longer want to see you. When they are driving in the streets, their sirens scare you. While I suspect that those who discovered the siren meant that it should be used for good purposes, for them it is a badge of honor, and they harass us in the streets. They acquire things which they have not worked for. They promise us things that they know they will never deliver. They want to be described as honorable even when they are horrible.
Benjamin, what's your take to that one?
I agree with him. Is spot on that. But what I would like to dwell on when it comes to this issue is how we ourselves are gullible and always falling for the same trick, always. I mean, both within the opposition, both and the ruling party, which is Zimbabwe, Zanu PF in Zimbabwe. They do the same thing over and over again. Come towards election, people are given, little maize here and there, little foodstuffs, and we are sold. Some, when it comes to the opposition, we are promised bullet trains, and nobody stops to ask, how are you going to even achieve all this? Where are we? There's a lot of questions to ask before you just agree to some of the things that are suggested. This is where it comes, where I always say, it's not about, when it comes to Zimbabwe, if we want democracy to prevail in Zimbabwe, it's not about changing governments. I mean, we've been there. We've just changed from Mugabe era to Mnangagwa era, and we are seeing exactly the same thing. Why is that? It is because we have no, democratic spaces in Zimbabwe. Whether we can change even Mnangagwa and put Chamisa, he will probably be exactly the same. Why? Because the political environment in Zimbabwe is toxic. How do we get rid of that? By reforming the whole environment, by reforming the whole political, economic space and social space in Zimbabwe. That is how we can get meaningful change. It's not about changing the person. We can put Chamisa, he will be just as bad because there is no way he's going to reform himself out of power. That is one thing that we need to realize. We are being sold short. Why? Because we are failing. We ourselves are failing. We cannot continue blaming the politician. The politician is just being a snake and doing what snakes do. It is now up to you to identify that this snake, or to see that there's a snake ahead and make a defensive move based on that. So unless we ourselves actually empower ourselves with knowledge and ask some of these fundamental questions and push for the drive for reforms, I'm afraid they will do the same thing for even billions of years. Nothing will change. We can just change individuals, but they will still do the same thing, and corruption and poverty will always be amongst us.
Well, my concluding remark would be that I think the Greeks were right 2,500 years ago when they left as a legacy to mankind democracy, government of the people, by the people. But that government can only work when the electorate themselves are informed, are educated, and they are diligent to hold those in positions of power to account. What has been disappointingly lacking in Zimbabwe and in many other African countries is an informed, knowledgeable, and diligent electorate. As long as we depend on the mercy of those in power, we are always going to be in trouble. I think for the sake of the record, it must be said here that in the case of Zimbabwe, when it comes to Zanu PF, the people did not have much of a choice in picking Zanu PF as the governing party. Zimbabwe, when we went for our first elections in 1980, Zanu PF made it very clear that if they did not win, the Bush war would continue. The mentality of Zanu PF leaders, Robert Mugabe in particular, has been that they have the right to rule the country. And they were willing to burn it down rather than allow anybody else to rule it. And that mentality has not changed. Mnangagwa has got the same mentality. The other day he was in Senegal, Dakar, talking of the people of Zimbabwe have decided that the people of Zimbabwe will rule the country. The whole of Africa knows that Mnangagwa rigged last year's elections. The AU had their own election observers last year in Zimbabwe. So was the regional body, SADC. They all came up with the same conclusion, that the electoral process in Zimbabwe was flawed and illegal. In other words, the ordinary Zimbabwean did not have a meaningful say in who should govern Zimbabwe. Mnangagwa and company just imposed themselves on the nation. And yet he turns around and says, Zimbabweans, Zimbabwe shatongwa nevayo. How absurd. And unfortunately, the only way to break that is for us to implement the reforms. But alas, when we got the chance to implement the reforms, it was wasted. And I think the failure to realize that fundamental weakness, that fundamental failure during the GNU is haunting us to this day. Because without first appreciating that the opposition had sold out on those reforms, we will never get the reforms implemented. And this system allows Zanu PF to get away with it. And it suits Zanu PF to the T. Zanu PF would love to have a disorganized, incompetent opposition, as long as they keep on participating and give the regime legitimacy. That is all they care about. We have got to break it. And the only way to break it is to learn for ourselves, to realize that this system, if it's going to be changed, we need to implement the reforms. And at the present moment, the people we have elected, entrusted that task to implement the reforms, have sold out. They've been bought out by Mnangagwa, just as Mugabe bought out Mai Mujuru and their colleagues soon after independence, so that they turned a blind eye to even something so outrageous as the murder of over 20,000 people. And you still pretend you didn't say it, just because she didn't want to get off the gravy train. The opposition is on the gravy train. During the GNU, they got onto the gravy train, and they've been on it ever since. And they are not going to implement the reforms as long as they know they've got a chance of winning a few seats on the gravy train. And as long as they participate, they give the regime legitimacy. SADC, I believe SADC would have denied Zanu PF legitimacy last year if the opposition, number one, had not participated in those flawed elections, and number two, had not accepted the gravy train seats, even after SADC had said those election process was flawed. But once they've accepted them, what could SADC do? SADC could surely not turn around if the people of Zimbabwe, both the ruling party and the opposition, were willing to accept the results and the process. SADC could not step in and say, no, we still don't accept the process. No. They had to accept it. And if the people themselves were easily conned into participating in their millions, what could SADC do? I'm surprised at the number of Zimbabweans, even to this day, with the benefit of hindsight, who still believe participating was a logical thing to do. It was the most irrational thing to do. And I think we are paying for it. Benjamin, you want to give your closing remarks?
Yeah, in closing, I would say I would agree with you and say it was for all this here to have happened, like, for example, for Mamjuru and them to claim ignorance over, the killings, and to say, it was Mugabe who did it alone. I think, it's just blaming each other, and trying to push the blame as far as possible away. But we all know that they were in it together. Then we come to the position of the opposition. I mean, I too agree with you to say, once they took up the parliamentary seats and Senate seats and whatever, whole gravy train that they took up after SADC had condemned these elections, that was the end of SADC's position. We cannot blame SADC for not doing anything once they took up those positions. They are the ones that actually made the process, legitimate, and they legalized the process. Because, I mean, how can SADC, an outsider, come and start saying what you guys did is not right when both are seeming to agree with each other? So yes, at the end of the day, it all comes down to the fact that how naive and how gullible most Zimbabweans are to actually just believe whatever they are told in and just taking the word for it and just walking away with it. I think this is where we have let ourselves down, and we can blame the opposition, we can blame Zanu PF, but at the end of the day, the main culprits is us Zimbabweans who believe in such nonsense every single time. For 44 years, we have been doing the same thing and expecting a different outcome. That only spells out madness. So that is my conclusion.
Thank you very much, Benjamin, and to the listeners, thank you very much for listening, for joining us tonight. Like I said, in future, if you want to join us in the discussion, please send me your comments, and we'll add them to the screen. And if you want also to join in person, I could send you the link. Once again, thank you very much for joining us tonight. And thank you very much, Benjamin. Thank you. Good night.
It was a pleasure. Thank you to our viewers.